1842. A British warship fires its cannons into a Chinese harbour. The gunpowder inside those cannons, invented by China. The magnetic compass guiding the fleet across open ocean, invented by China. The watertight compartments keeping the hull afloat, invented by China. Every piece of critical technology on those warships carried Chinese DNA. And in a few brutal hours, the civilization that created those tools watched the world turn them against it. Welcome back to Silk Road Annals. Today, we're performing a forensic autopsy on history. 22 ancient Chinese inventions so advanced, they prove this civilization was already living in the future, centuries before the rest of the world caught up. Conquering the Earth. 1. Deep drilling and natural gas. We think of oil and gas drilling as a modern marvel. The first American oil well was drilled in 1859 in Pennsylvania, at a depth of just 69 feet. That was considered groundbreaking. Over 2,000 years earlier, salt miners in Zhejiang, Sichuan province, were already drilling boreholes more than 4,800 feet into the earth. Using heavy iron drill bits suspended from towering bamboo derricks, teams of workers percussively smashed through solid rock, layer by layer. The operation was enormous. Some wells took generations to complete, with fathers passing the project down to their sons. And then they hit something unexpected: pockets of natural gas trapped deep underground. Instead of running, they captured it. Engineers built miles of airtight bamboo pipelines to transport this combustible gas to evaporation pans, fueling massive industrial salt production. An entire city's economy ran on energy harvested from beneath the earth, 2 millennia before the modern petroleum age even had a name. 2. The heavy moldboard plough. For centuries, farmers across the ancient world scratched the surface of the earth with wooden sticks. The soil barely moved. Crop yields stayed painfully low. Then, during the Han Dynasty, engineers created the quan, a heavy iron plough with a central sharp point and curved wings that acted as a moldboard. This wasn't just cutting the soil. The curved wings pushed the earth sideways and flipped it over in a single pass, burying weeds so they decomposed into natural fertilizer. A farmer in the Yellow River Valley could now plough a hillside along its contours, preventing the kind of massive soil erosion that destroyed farmland across other ancient civilizations. One tool changed the equation between starvation and surplus. 3. The multi-tube seed drill. Even with better ploughs, planting remained chaotic. Across most of the ancient world, and in Europe all the way up to the 18th century, farmers sowed seeds by throwing them into the wind by hand. Half the crop was lost to birds, uneven spacing, or seeds landing on barren ground. By the 2nd century BC, Chinese engineers solved this with a mobile, animal-drawn seed drill. This machine had multiple legs that dug parallel ditches, tubes that deposited seeds at a precise, uniform depth, and a trailing mechanism that pressed the earth flat over them, all in one continuous motion. A single pass across a field could do what previously took days of manual labor. The result was an agricultural revolution that fed a booming population, generating the surplus wealth that would fund everything that followed. 4. Sticky rice mortar. Here's a question nobody thinks to ask. Why has the Great Wall of China survived over 600 years of earthquakes, typhoons, and monsoons, while countless European stone structures from the same era crumbled? The answer is in the kitchen. During the Ming Dynasty, builders mixed standard limestone mortar with vats of boiling sticky rice soup. The amylopectin molecules from the glutinous rice formed an organic-inorganic composite bond at the molecular level, creating a mortar that was not only waterproof but flexible. The wall could absorb seismic shocks, and bend rather than shatter. Modern materials scientists at Zhejiang University have tested this mortar and confirmed it. The sticky rice compound is one of the strongest organic binding agents ever created in the pre-industrial world. Sections of wall built with it remain structurally sound today, over 6 centuries later. Forging an industrial machine. 5. The blast furnace and cast iron. By the 5th century BC, Chinese metallurgists in the state of Chu had built towering furnaces that could reach temperatures above 1,300 degrees Celsius, hot enough to completely melt iron ore into liquid that could be poured into sand molds like water into a cup. This was cast iron, strong, mass-producible, and cheap enough to put into the hands of ordinary citizens. Suddenly, a common farmer could own an iron plough. A village could build iron bridges. A city could run on iron tools. To put this in perspective, European metallurgists would not achieve large-scale liquid iron production until almost 2,000 years later. For most of that gap, Western blacksmiths were still hammering spongy lumps of wrought iron by hand, one tool at a time. China had already industrialized. 6. The double-action piston bellows. Those blast furnaces needed something to breathe, a constant, powerful stream of air to keep temperatures above the melting point of iron. The solution was a mechanical lung. Chinese engineers invented a piston bellows where a cylinder with synchronized valves pumped a continuous blast of high-pressure air on both the push and the pull strokes. No pause, no dead zone, just relentless oxygen feeding the fire. The mechanical logic inside those bellows, a piston, a cylinder, synchronized valves, continuous power output, was the exact ancestor of the double-acting steam engine that would later power the Western Industrial Revolution. The principle was identical, only the fuel source changed. 7. Interchangeable parts. Over 2,200 years ago, the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, faced a problem of unprecedented scale. He needed to arm over 1 million soldiers, fast, and keep them armed across a sprawling empire. When archaeologists excavated the terracotta army pits in Xi'an, they found something that stunned modern engineers. The bronze crossbow triggers recovered from the site were not handcrafted one at a time. Each trigger was made of exactly 4 standardized components, mass-produced in separate batches. Forensic analysis revealed manufacturing tolerances varying by less than a millimeter. A soldier on the frontier could swap a broken trigger component from his crossbow with one from a fallen comrade's weapon and be back in the fight instantly. No blacksmith required. This was industrial standardization, the foundational logic behind every modern assembly line, mastered 2 millennia before Eli Whitney or Henry Ford. 8. The bristle toothbrush. Not every revolution requires a blast furnace. Sometimes it starts in the bathroom. In 1498, during the Ming Dynasty, craftsmen attached stiff hairs plucked from the necks of cold-climate pigs onto handles carved from bone and bamboo. It was the world's first bristle toothbrush, a simple object that quietly changed daily human hygiene forever. For most of human history, people cleaned their teeth with frayed twigs, rough cloth, or nothing at all. The Chinese toothbrush was so effective that when it finally reached England nearly 300 years later, it was marketed as a luxury item. Today, it sits in every bathroom on the planet. The Information Revolution. 9. Papermaking. In 105 AD, a Han court official named Kai Lun presented Emperor He with a new material. Kai Lun hadn't invented paper from scratch. Earlier forms existed, but he perfected a scalable industrial process using crushed tree bark, hemp, old rags and fishing nets, all treated with lye and pounded into thin, uniform sheets. This wasn't a craft, it was manufacturing. Within decades, paper replaced heavy bamboo strips and expensive silk as the empire's primary medium for communication. Government intelligence could now move at the speed of a horse rather than an ox cart. Military orders, tax records, legal contracts, all suddenly portable, lightweight, and cheap. And the Chinese didn't stop at writing. By the 14th century, paper was used for wrapping, for cups, for windows, and yes, for toilet paper, mass-produced in the millions of sheets annually. A single invention rewired how an entire civilization stored and transmitted knowledge. 10. Movable type printing. We're taught that Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in the 1450s. The real story starts 400 years earlier. Around 1040 AD, during the Song dynasty, a humble artisan named Bi Sheng devised a system using individual characters carved from baked clay. He arranged these characters on an iron plate coated with a mixture of pine resin, wax, and paper ash. Once set, the plate could print thousands of identical pages. When the job was done, the plate was gently heated to loosen the adhesive, and the characters were rearranged for the next text. Bi Sheng's system was ingenious, though the sheer number of Chinese characters, tens of thousands, made it more complex than alphabetic printing. It was later refined with wooden and then metal type during the Yuan and Ming dynasties. The core principle, reusable, rearrangeable type, was the same principle that would eventually transform Europe. China got there first. 11. Fiat money. By the late Tang dynasty, China's economy had grown so large that its own money became a logistical problem. Merchants transporting thousands of heavy copper coins across vast distances faced slow travel, robbery, and sheer physical exhaustion. The solution was radical: unhook value from metal entirely. First came flying money, promissory notes issued by regional deposit shops. Then, under the Song dynasty, the government in Chengdu issued the world's first state-backed paper currency called jiaozi. Here's the part that rarely gets told. Counterfeiting was an immediate threat, so Song officials embedded multiple layers of anti-counterfeiting technology. Specialized paper fibers that were difficult to replicate, intricate multicolor printing, government authentication seals, and severe legal penalties. They understood, 1,000 years ago, that money is fundamentally an information technology, a system of trust encoded on a physical medium. Engineering the impossible. 12. The segmental arch bridge. Standard semicircular bridges, the kind Romans built across their empire, had a critical flaw. During floods, they acted like stone dams, blocking the surging water until the pressure ripped them apart. In 605 AD, a stonemason named Li Chun built the Anji Bridge in Hebei province with a radical design. A flattened, shallow arc that used far less material and rose lower above the riverbank, making it easier for carts and horses to cross. The true genius was in what he removed. Li Chun cut open spandrels, smaller arches, directly through the bridge's shoulders. During a flood, instead of fighting the water, the bridge let the river surge through it. The Anji Bridge has been standing for over 1,400 years. It survived wars, earthquakes, and floods that destroyed everything around it. 13. The suspension bridge. When the terrain was too wild for stone arches, deep gorges, raging mountain rivers, Han Dynasty engineers developed the world's first suspension bridges. What began as simple rope crossings evolved over centuries into flat roadways suspended from iron chains and cables, capable of carrying livestock and loaded carts across chasms that no stone bridge could span. The engineering principle, distributing load along a tensioned cable anchored at both ends, is the exact same principle holding up the Golden Gate Bridge and every modern suspension bridge on Earth. 14. Watertight bulkheads. In 1912, the Titanic sank because its hull compartments were not fully sealed at the top. Water spilled from one breached compartment into the next in a deadly cascade. Over 1,000 years earlier, Song dynasty shipwrights had already solved this problem. They divided the hulls of their massive ocean-going junks into completely separate, fully sealed watertight compartments. If the ship struck a reef and breached one section, the water stayed trapped there. The rest of the vessel remained dry and the ship kept sailing. When European shipbuilders eventually adopted this technique centuries later, they treated it as a breakthrough. The Chinese had been using it since before the Norman conquest of England. 15. The sternpost rudder. Ancient Mediterranean sailors steered their ships with clumsy oars lashed to the side of the hull. Turning required enormous human strength, and in heavy seas, a side-mounted steering oar could snap or drag, leaving the ship helpless. By the 1st century AD, Chinese shipbuilders mounted a vertical blade directly on the sternpost at the back of the ship, the world's first true axial rudder. A single helmsman could now steer a massive vessel through violent storms with precision, using the water's own pressure against the blade to amplify the turning force. Combined with watertight bulkheads, this gave Chinese fleets a decisive advantage on the open ocean for centuries. 16. The magnetic compass. Navigation before the compass meant hugging the coastline or praying for clear, starry nights. Lose sight of land or stars, and you were lost. It started as something mystical. Han Dynasty fortune-tellers used a magnetized lodestone spoon on a polished bronze plate to read spiritual energy. Over time, practitioners noticed that the spoon always settled, pointing in the same direction. By the Song dynasty, navigators had refined this into a magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water, a true compass. For the first time in human history, a captain could strike out across the open Pacific, guided by the invisible magnetic field of the Earth itself. Coastlines became optional. The age of deep ocean navigation had begun. 17. The seismoscope. An earthquake could devastate a distant province, killing thousands, and the emperor in the capital wouldn't know for weeks, long after the window for sending relief had closed. In 132 AD, the polymath Zhang Heng, astronomer, mathematician, and chief court engineer, built a device unlike anything the world had seen. It was a massive bronze vessel, 6 feet across, ringed with 8 dragon heads, each holding a bronze ball in its jaws. Below each dragon sat a bronze toad with an open mouth. Inside the sealed vessel, a heavy pendulum hung motionless. When seismic waves from a distant earthquake reached the capital, the ground shifted, but inertia kept the pendulum still. The difference in motion triggered a lever mechanism that knocked a single ball from the dragon facing the earthquake's direction into the toad below. In 138 AD, the device detected an earthquake roughly 400 miles to the northwest. No one at court had felt a tremor. Days later, a messenger arrived confirming devastation in Longxi province, exactly where the dragon had pointed. The Western world would not build a functional seismograph until 1,700 years later. Weaponizing knowledge. 18. Gunpowder and chemical warfare. In the 9th century, Tang dynasty alchemists, in their search for an elixir of immortality, mixed sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal in a crucible. What they found was the opposite of eternal life. The earliest known written formula for gunpowder appears in the Wujing Zongyao, a Song dynasty military manual compiled in 1044 AD. It didn't describe fireworks, it described weapons. Chinese military engineers packed gunpowder into fragmentation bombs filled with iron pellets, porcelain shards, and toxic chemical agents that produced blinding, choking smoke. These were deployed from trebuchets, catapults, and fire arrows against enemy armies. This was not a parlor trick. This was systematic chemical warfare, engineered and refined over centuries, long before it ever reached the Middle East or Europe. 19. Multistage rockets. The Ming Dynasty military manual, known as the Huolong-Jing, compiled around 1400 AD by Jiao Yu and Liu Bowen, reads like a page from a science fiction novel. It describes the fire dragon issuing from the water, a winged aerodynamic frame with solid propellant booster rockets strapped to its body. When the primary boosters burned out, they automatically ignited a swarm of smaller explosive rockets that launched from the dragon's mouth toward the target. This was the world's first documented multi-stage rocket system. Sequential ignition, stage separation, and terminal payload delivery. The foundational logic behind every modern rocket, from the V2 to the Saturn V. The Ming military had it on paper 600 years ago. 20. The stirrup. Before the stirrup, mounted combat was an exercise in terror. Riders gripped the horse's body with their thighs, constantly one sudden movement away from falling to their death under the hooves of charging cavalry. Archaeological evidence from tombs in Hunan province, dating to around the 4th century AD, reveals the earliest known paired metal stirrups, cast iron or bronze loops designed to support both feet. The physics of warfare changed overnight. A rider locked into stirrups could brace against the horse's momentum, absorb the shock of a lance strike, and fight with a heavy sword without losing balance. It made heavy armored cavalry viable for the first time. This invention spread westward along the Silk Road and played a critical role in the rise of the armored medieval knights of Europe. A small loop of metal reshaped the battlefield for 1,000 years. Mastering time and space. 21. The hydromechanical clock tower. In 1094 AD, the polymath Su Song completed one of the most ambitious engineering projects of the medieval world, a 40-foot-tall astronomical clock tower in the Song capital of Kaifeng. At its heart was an ingenious escapement mechanism, a device that captured the continuous flow of water and converted it into precisely regulated discrete ticks. Each tick advanced a massive chain drive, the world's first known endless power transmitting chain, which turned an armillary sphere on the roof to track the stars and rotated display wheels showing the time. The escapement is the fundamental heartbeat of every mechanical clock ever built. Su Song's tower achieved it with water. Europe would reach the same principle with weights and gears nearly 3 centuries later. The logic was born in Kaifeng. 22. The south-pointing chariot. No magnets, no lodestones, no compass. The south-pointing chariot was a wheeled vehicle with a small wooden figure mounted on top that always pointed south, no matter how wildly the cart turned, reversed, or zigzagged across rough terrain. The secret was a differential gear train hidden inside the chassis. This mechanism mathematically calculated the difference in distance traveled by the outer and inner wheels during every turn, and continuously adjusted the pointer to compensate. If you drive a modern car, this exact same mechanical logic is sitting inside your rear axle right now. The differential gear allows your wheels to rotate at different speeds when you turn a corner. Chinese engineers solved that problem over 2,000 years ago with wood and bronze in a chariot. 22 inventions: drilling, farming, printing, navigation, rocketry, precision engineering. Not isolated curiosities locked inside a palace, an interconnected industrial system where each breakthrough fueled the next. Iron smelting enabled standardized weapons. Paper enabled printed currency. The compass enabled ocean trade that funded it all. And in 1842, every cannon, every compass, every watertight compartment on those British warships carried Chinese DNA. The empire that invented gunpowder watched its own creation tear through its harbors. 22 loaded weapons handed to the world. The question history asks is not whether China could innovate, It clearly could. The question is whether any civilization, then or now, can hold on to its own fire. Which of these 22 inventions shocked you the most? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to keep uncovering the buried secrets of the ancient world, hit subscribe and join us next time on Silk Road Annals.